Next part. After dropping the key on the floor, she bent down to pick it up and noticed a keyhole below the last drawer on the right. It was in a very secret spot, and for if she had not have dropped it down, she would have never ever seen it. Without hesitation, her curiosity got to her. She put the key in the hole and turned it. She heard a silent mechanical sound and followed by a loud knock. Not too curious at first, she tried to open the bottom drawer. It was locked. She still tried a few more drawers and thought how junk that stupid desk was. I guess now it is as good a time as any to explain what I mean when Darlin uses the slang junk. For it's been mentioned in the story a few times. You might not know what it actually means. This saying of hers goes back to when she was really young, 5 years old, before she was shipped off to private school full time. Her parents' lifestyle used to include lots of swearing, so unfortunately she learned the meaning of bad words at a very young age. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't as if they swore at her or even in front of her. Well, maybe sometimes, but for the most part, they didn't. They thought they were being clever by using codes for swearing. For example, when they were about to say bad words, they would short form it. For example, what the heck did you buy me this piece of S for? Which was code for the swear word. Well, perhaps it was Darlin's need to show her parents at the time that she had cracked the code, or she was said to, or it was said it was just to show off in front of the company. The story goes that at a dinner party, her and her parents were hosting, Darlin yelled out for all to hear, "Do I have to eat this junk?" And everybody laughed as she had abbreviated the wrong word. She noticed that she did not get in trouble for saying what she had thought at the time was a bad word. Darlin was really young back then and would normally have gotten in trouble if she had said a bad word. For her being smart enough to catch that people would not get angry if she used this short form, over time it developed to from P of junk, evolved to junk, thus giving the birth to Darlin's saying of junk. Now getting back to the story. Darlin tried to open the middle drawer and it did not open. She could not see the other keyhole below the handle, at first thinking, how many keyholes does this stupid desk have? What the heck is with this? The thing really is junk. She bent down to grab the skeleton key out of the keyhole, and to her surprise, this was very hard to do. She turned the key to the right and felt like some sort of resistance. When the key made it to the center of the lock, she heard a clicking sound followed by a knocking sound. She then was able to remove the key, and noticed that it unlocked the top drawer. Pulling open the drawer to get her little piece of her dress that had torn off, and perhaps find some scissors, the drawer was lined with green velvet and only contained a couple of bottles of ink and a fountain pen. Continuing to go through all the drawers, she did not find any scissors, just junk. When she came to the last drawer, it felt rather heavy to pull out, but it was empty. except for a dark green lining and an old envelope full of stamps. When she went to reclose the doors, she seen that the keyhole again and decided to see what was within the drawer. She removed the key from the middle of the drawer and to pull it back, and the hole turned. She could hear the sound of the gears moving, followed by another knock. When Darlin opened the door the second time, she seen that the drawer was now lined with red velvet and contained a stack of very old papers, stained yellow with time. The papers were bound with a red ribbon. This was a hidden drawer. Once Darlin picked up the bundle of papers, she could read on the front page, "The Witches of Oz." Darlin's jaw dropped, as well as the stack of papers. She brought her hand up to the side of her face and began to rub the sides of her temples, unaware that this was a common reaction for her in stressful situations. She continued to read 1864. Out of curiosity, she untied the ribbon bundle, which was now on the desk, and was flipping through the pages. And she began to read. Dorothy lived in the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry, who was the farmer, and Auntie Em. Darlin turned a chapter or so. "Did you groan?" asked Dorothy. She read. "I've been groaning for more than a year, and no one has ever heard me before or come up to help me," answered the Tin Man. She continued reading. "What can I do for you?" she asked. For she moved by the sad voice in which the man spoke. "Just get the oil can and oil my joints," the Tin Man said. Darlin shook her head at what she was reading and came to the conclusion that this was like an original handwritten version of The Wizard of Oz. She had read to her. She remembers because she had it read to her by her grade 3 teacher, Mrs. Northington. After flipping a few pages, she read the final words of the book. "From the land of Oz, Dorothy gravy, and here is Toto too. Oh, Auntie Em, I'm so glad to be home. The end." Down at the bottom of the page, written with an X and a slash for someone to sign, but had no signature. Stunned at her find, she sat there in amazement, reading the last sentence again. By the time she came to the part, "Here is Toto," Darlin remembered disco. She quickly put the stack of papers back together and tied the red ribbon bow and placed them back in the bottom of the drawer. Made sure that she had her little piece of fabric from her dress and turned the key, and she heard a click. After pushing all the drawers, she shut and making sure everything was in order, she locked the top of the middle drawer and hooked the key back into the ladder and turned to leave, only to notice that the entranceway to the elevator was gone. She was trapped. Collapsing to the floor in the middle of the room on the orange small rug, she sat in defeat. Almost instantly, as she sat down, let's try to find my. Almost instantly, she sat down. Right. Where am I? Sorry, a little bit of book. The room collapsing the floor. Oh yeah. Almost instantly, she sat down. She sprung up in a spinning motion. Hey, one of these books is going to open a secret passage. She started to go around the room, around the bottom two shelves, pulling on books occasionally pulling on books and looking especially for a Wizard of Oz one. At first, just randomly, but when nothing happened, she thought that she should do this more methodically. One book at a time, book by book. After doing the entire four shelves, lower shelves, and an hour's worth of time went by, Darlin was getting very stressed. She thought of giving up and breaking the window and yelling out whether or not anyone would ever be able to hear her. She then thought of the trouble she might get in for her little adventure, and it gave her the courage to keep looking, keep checking the books. The room was almost done. She rode the ladder all the way around the room, checking the top rows of the books. She only had about 3 more books to go when she spotted a pair of scissors hanging on a nail. She reached through the ladder, grabbed the scissors, turned with her back leaning against the ladder, and pulled up the tip of her skirt and tipped out the part that was frayed. When she turned around, the first thing she seen was the oil can. For some reason, she picked it up. She got down off the ladder. This was really some coincidence. She must be going nuts. She had been dreaming of the Wizard of Oz in class, having nightmares at night, finding ruby slippers. Now she's found a secret passage. She found the oil can was now in her hands. She then found a handwritten copy of the Wizard of Oz. After pulling on the Wizard of Oz book that revealed the secret passage to the castle, she was either going nuts or somehow her recent studies of the Wiccan ways have gave her some sort of foresight. She contemplated this for a minute and placed the oil can down on the carpet and went back up to check the last few books. The last book that she came across was The Wizard of Oz. She thought to herself, no way. As if, why didn't she think to look for it before? Start there before. She pulled out the book and the ladder gave way, turning into a makeshift slide. She slid down the ladder on her belly, screaming at first, thinking the ladder had broke, then realizing that she was in fact sliding down past the floor into a dark tunnel. The orange rug had disappeared and it left a round slide. She was moving very fast, descending down some sort of twisty slide. Screaming now, Darlin turned onto her back and continued sliding for what seemed to be forever. The dark slide still echoing with her screams. Darlin could see a light as she flew down the slide into a somersault, landing in the end of a bed. On her back with her feet just off the end of the bed, looking straight up at black silk drapes. Black silk draped over a canopy bed, somewhat like her mother's. As Darlin sat up and turned around, she realized the decor of the room was in her grandmother's room. It had the same dreary look as her black dress that she always wore. Looking behind her and above the headboard, she could see a painting slowly lowering itself, hiding the tunnel that she had just slid out from. Within a few seconds, the passage was completely gone. Darlin found painting very peculiar. It was 4 young girls that were all dressed as witches. They were on stage in front of a crowd of people. Darlin was reminded of her graduation. Of a graduation. 3 of the girls looked like identical twins, standing and pointing, and appeared to be laughing at one other girl who was at the podium I don't even know, a speculated crowd. A girl speaking at a crowd, it looked like. When she looked a little close and Darling could see the lone girl at the podium cape was smoking. Darling shook her head at the thought of how odd this painting was. Like Benson had said yesterday, the richer you are, the more eccentric you get. The room was the shape of a giant rhombus, and Darling was standing right in the middle of it. The bed was covered with a dark gray blanket with a black silk pillow. Darling quickly stirred out the blanket and noticed that the oil can had fell down the slide with her. She picked it up. Hopefully she would be able to get out of this without getting into trouble. Once satisfied that the bed looked like no one had touched it, she began to look for an exit. The last thing she wanted was to have to explain how or why she was there in the first place. Looking around the room for an exit, she could see that her grandmother's room was real cold and borderline creepy. It lacked a sense of style of any sorts. The bed itself had 4 big posters made of dark brown walnut, each poster carved to look like that it had large thistles reaching out of the wooden vines wrapped around them. 6 feet high at the top of each poster was a wooden fist with a black silk slick. She was staring at was black, I guess a black fist at the top. The walls of the room were lined with the same dark walnut and paneling as the bed. As Darling made it over to check what looked like the main door, she could see that the walls were made up of different drawers and cubbies. Big log doors met at a point at the top. Almost as soon as she could put her ear to the door, she heard a voice. It was her grandmother's voice, and it was getting louder. She quickly sprinted deep into the room and hid between a massive mirror and a closet, behind some sort of curtain across the bed. Standing straight up with her face towards the wall, she waited and listened. What was she going to say to her grandmother? She was already a mean old lady before she had her privacy invaded. She could think of nothing except to just try not to be found. She was trying to make sure she was hiding very good by making herself as small as she could when she heard the door creak open and someone walk in. I will take my steam later. There's no time. We have to get out back. Some guests have already arrived, spoke Darling's grandmother from the other room. She was speaking rather loudly, as if someone was in the room with her. Darling could feel a slight breeze as her grandmother sped by the closet. She felt a little relief to know that her grandmother had passed and she had still not been detected. Still unaware that she might get caught, she quieted her breathing. Darling could hear her grandmother fumbling around, going through a few different drawers looking for something. After a few minutes of this torture, she had to take a peek. Carefully, she slid the curtain and slowly until she could see her grandmother's reflection in the mirror. She was up on a stepladder reaching for a box. Darling could see her huge petticoat up in the air. Looking down at her feet, Darling could not believe her eyes. That bitch, she thought. After all that nagging and questioning last night, she was wearing ruby slippers. Except these weren't heels. These were real ruby slippers, just like in the movie. When she and her grandmother began When she seen her grandmother begin to step down, she immediately reclused back into the shadows of the closet behind the curtain and slid tight into the corner as to be undetected. She could hear her walk up and stop right beside her, holding her breath ever so tightly. The only thing Darling could hear was her grandmother's wheezing breath, just inches away from her. This was it. What was she going to say? Is this as if she doesn't have a heart attack and die from Darlin's intrusion? Darlin stood there holding her breath, waiting for the inevitable. She felt a swift breeze and heard her grandmother leave the room. Whew. She had done it. She went undetected and was in the clear. Not a second went by after she heard the door close. Darlin jumped out from behind the black curtain. She started to straighten it out, hoping that it would remain undetected, when she realized that it wasn't a black curtain at all, but a black cape, accompanied by a witch's hat at the top of it. This was all getting really too weird for her. The coincidences are uncanny. The dreams, the books, the heels, her grandma, the witch's hat. There was something going on. Perhaps something she heard or done unknowingly through messing with that witch's book. Her and her friends had gotten before, I guess. Maybe it was one big dream. She wished for a moment to wake up, but the realness of her surroundings crushed all hopes of that. There was no time to waste. She had to get out of there. On the other side of the room, she had seen another door, and just past the step ladder her grandmother was standing on. Daughter ran over and opened the door. It was the bathroom. She closed it and turned back towards the big doors to see if her grandmother had left the next room. After listening to the door and hearing voices, she went back by the mirror in case her grandmother had come back in. This time, Darlin ran for cover of the witch's cloak she seen on the book next to the mirror. Same copy of The Wizard of Oz. See, that's all mumbled. Sorry, guys, but don't ever email something and then switch it, because you don't get no punctuation. The Wizard of Oz that had revealed the 2 last secret passages. I don't know what that means. Anyway, moving on. Stopping instantly, she decided to see if it worked. The moment she pulled the book back, the mirror began to rise. She had found another secret passage. She seen her reflection begin to disappear as the mirror went up. Darlin took note of how stupid she looked, holding that oil can still. She should have never picked it up in the first place. As soon as the mirror rose high enough, she got under it and darted into the tunnel. The only light available was that from the room that she had just left. As she ran through the passage, it darkened, and further she went. While running, she wondered if it wasn't for her silly dream that Benson had told her, would she have ever even picked up that stupid oil can. Now she would have to risk going back into the tower to put it back. When the path opened up, Darlin realized that she reached the area with the 3 paths she had been earlier. When she went up into the tower, the mirror of her grandmother's room slid down slowly and the path turned pitch dark. Darlin stood there a moment in the pitch dark. She did not have the torch. She knew that it was too far to go all the way back to her suite in the dark. Plus, there was those little rock climbing things, and she still hadn't found Disco. A little worried, she cried out, "Disco! Disco!" To her amazement, she heard a bark, and it was coming from the third passage she had not taken yet. Very curiously, cautiously, she started to make her way down the passage, using her fingers on the walls towards Disco's barks. Darling could feel a buildup of dirt on her hands from having to keep them on the walls. "Oh great, now I have to get a manicure. Disco," she called out. Disco could hear. She could hear Disco's barks get louder and louder. She knelt down towards the pitch black, and she could hear Disco running towards her, her long painted toenails clipping on the cement floor. She put her hands low to the ground, and the first thing she felt was Disco licking inside her mouth. Normally, Darlin loved kisses from Disco, but not inside her mouth. She spit a few times. "Oh, Disco, where have you been? I've been looking everywhere for you." The two of them stood in the dark, thankful to finally have found each other. It wasn't as if Disco had ever gone missing before, but this was the first time Darling was ever worried about her. Oh yeah, this thing's turned the wrong way, eh? I'm gonna turn the wrong way. The two of them worried about her. After a few minutes of cuddling, Disco barked twice, then ran back down the path which she had just came. "Disco, Disco, get back here, come here," Darling cried out, only to hear Disco's barks getting further and further away. In the pitch black, Darling stood up using the wall as a guide and followed her barks. Darling could feel the moisture of the stone walls as her fingers brushed along them. As soon as the path started to curve, she could see a slight orange glow in the distance. When she made it close enough, she could see that Disco was at the end of the path, waiting for her. "What have you there?" asked Darling to Disco. She knelt down beside little Disco to investigate. The orange glow was coming from a room on the other side of what looked like another mirror, two-way mirror. She put her face up against and peered into it, but could not see anything through the orange haze. The room appeared to be full of smoke or steam. She quickly looked around to see how to open the mirror, as it looked like it was a door, another one of these sliding mirrors. After a few seconds of feeling around, she could not find any way to open it. Disco was up on her 2 feet looking into a hole a bit larger than just a person's arm. There was 2 holes, one on top of each other, one to the left side of the door and one to the right. "You think it's in there?" she asked the dog, as if Disco would answer. Darling reached in the hole, but there was nothing. She went down to the hole that Disco was at the end. That's one word. At and it too. And at it too. Disco was at and it too. I think that's what it is, because it's like one big word here. Had nothing. Maybe she had to reach deeper. She put her arm in all the way up to her bicep. She got an eerie feeling like, what if there's bugs, and pulled her arm out quickly. Getting down on her knees, Darling tried to look in the lower hole, but could see nothing.
She had to try. She put her arm back in and reached as far as she could. There was a button, and when she pressed it, the armhole closed around her. Her arm was stuck. She was trapped. She started to panic for a bit, realizing that it would not help the situation. She stopped and tried to carefully work her arm free, but it was locked. The security feature, it was some sort of trap. What had she gotten herself into now? She started to think that this was the day she was going to be the death of her, never mind her 16th birthday. Then she had an idea. Disco, you're going to have to go for help. I'm stuck. Go get Benson. Darn looked at Disco, realizing that Disco would not know what she was talking about. Disco looked at her almost as if she understood, then jumped into the lower hole on the left side. Disco, no, you're going to get stuck. Panicked, Darling tried to grab Disco's tail, but it was too late. She went into the hole, and a few seconds later, Darling felt her arm be freed. And she pulled it out as the glass door started to slide up. As soon as the glass rose, enough smoke or steam started to pour out of the room. Darling reached into the hole that Disco was in and pulled her out gently by her tail. When the smoke cleared, Darling could see that the orange glow was coming from within the room was a fire burning under what appeared to be a black cauldron. Looking past it, she could see that her room was round and made that the room was round and made of gold brick. With Disco in her arms, she took a step in, and now she could see the entire room. From the grout between the bricks was some sort of roots that were spread across the brick like some sort of designer lace. She walked over to the cauldron and looked inside to see what was boiling away. This is a witch's cauldron. Her grandmother was a witch, she told herself, staring at the purple liquid boiling away in the cauldron. She watched the purple bubbles form and then disappear, and then white stars then evaporate into steam. Darling did not touch it. She walked away towards the old wooden makeshift science table that seemed to defy any logic. It was littered with all sorts of test tubes and crazy, I don't know what that word is. When Darling made it, what's it tea? It tea. When Darling made it to the table, she could see the test tubes that were stacked like something from a Cat in the Hat book, filled with green and red, blue different liquids accumulating in large teardrop bowls, swirling in color combinations. This was a very trippy looking setup. Looking into the bowl, she could see her own reflection as it distorted. The condensation was gathering underneath the teardrop bowl and dripping into an old wooden bowl. Every time a drop splashed into the bowl, grillet would fizz up and form a miniature twister. I don't know what that word is. Basically, when it would drip down, a little miniature twister would come up in the wooden bowl. Oh my God, she gasped. Darling's seen a lot in her days, but nothing compared to this. One time in science class, she had named Lily burn her eyebrows off permanently, giving her hair one of those pure white, and giving her friend's hair one of those pure white stripes. The teacher said it was due to extreme fear. Darling tried to figure out The stack of test tubes was actually staying up, walking around the table. When she arrived at the other side, she had seen a very old leather-bound book. It had metal bindings and was faded green leather. Rubbing her hand over the raised printing, she could tell that it had been used and had a large S that had been worn down with very much use. The side had a lock, but it was undone. She opened the book and made some sort of cackling, and the book made some sort of cackling sound. Darling jumped back, dropping it closed again. After building up the nerve again, she lifted it open again. Hee 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 hee, it crackled. This time when she stepped back, she gave it. This time when, see it says went. That's the thing. All of these things are all screwed up. I don't know how this happened. Google. She gave it an extra push so that it would fall open this time. This time, taking a couple steps back, she bumped into some sort of rack, causing a clutter to fall behind her. Disco began to bark frantically as an array of brooms and a Swiffer-looking thing fell, scaring her to the other side of the room. Darlin turned to see what had fallen and began to pick them up. The Swiffer looked like a wooden version. Disco, quit your whining, soothed Darlin in a frantic voice, as Disco sat making cute noises from across the room. Some of the brooms were really old, made of straw, like the ones you see in the movies, the witches ride. The new nylon in the Swift one did not look like they belonged, but still were composed of wood as if prototypes. Darling concluded that they were actually used for cleaning. But by looking at the room, she could see that it had been a while since anyone had actually done any cleaning. After cleaning up her mess, Darling went back to the now soundless book that was laying wide open. The pages were tattered and made out of old parchment paper. Looking at the page that was open, Darlin read. And then there's your, well, I guess it's backwards, eh? Ah, funny. That's funny. It says sunny day. Houndstooth, powdered thyme, bottled sun, pulverized daisy, Sir Western wing, let settle, then blow slowly till desired day. Is this a spell for a sunny day? Darlin asked herself, flipping to the next page. Every page looked like every page she looked at had a different spell. One of them was time saver. Another one was invention of need. Glory days. Not to mention a few hundred others. When Darlin turned back, she seen that the last 20 pages or so, there were diagrams holding wands in different positions with commands. Because she was an amateur witch, this seemed interesting to her. She skimmed over them for a few seconds, but Disco whining was getting annoying. Darlin went to walk over to the other side where Disco was when she seen it. The gripping fear from her childhood was flooding through her like glass of hot coffee being overfilled. Was that it? The faces, the sounds, all the torn fragments of that awful day racing through her mind. Just beside the table, a red silk covered globe. That was it. She could never forget. Darlin walked by it without taking her eyes off of it. When she finally cleared it, she turned and walked around the cauldron. And there was an easel in front of the cauldron with a single page that had been pulled out of the spell book. It said vanity. She read it out loud, then took a moment to read some of the ingredients. Disco wine cut. I don't know. Disco did something. She looked down to see Disco at the foot of the black curtains in front of her that were hanging on a copper pipe rod attached to the roof, like an old circle shower curtain stall. Shh, Disco. Wow, what? Wow, look at that, Darlin said, slightly annoyed. Beside the curtain, Darlin marveled at what looked like a very old china cabinet, loaded with glass jars, potions, assortment of small bags and boxes. Skimming through the labels, Darlin could see that this was stock for making spells. Wow, this is real. Her grandmother was really a witch. Was Darlin's recent interest in witchcraft come from her grandmother's side of the family, perhaps? Although her and her girls were trying to take it seriously, Darlin never truly believed that any of it could be real. I think it was like one last game before growing up. She thought of it as one last game before growing up, something that her and her friends could play without actually playing. It was make-believe, but with enough literature and science that she could at least try to believe in the possibility of the Wiccan way. Now that has all changed, as she held a bottle contained of blood of Barnum in her hand, whatever the heck that was. Darlin pulled out her cell phone to check the time. She had been on this wild goose chase for 3 hours. She then realized she should have used her flashlight on her phone. She put her phone back in her pocket and realized that she had to find her way out now. She could have spent all day in there going through those knickknacks and spells, cool stuff, but she did not want to get caught, and she had to find a way out. Winter and Kaylee are never going to believe this, she thought as she looked around the room, looking up at the golden bricks. This room was it was egg-shaped and was approximately 15 feet high in circumference. Back where she came in, she looked through the glass door she had entered in the room. It wasn't a mirror, but she could see her reflection slightly in it. She could see behind her on the other side of the cauldron was a dusty old bookshelf. Immediately she turned around and began to investigate and to see if there was a copy of the book to release the hidden passage. On her way over, she cautiously passed the covered globe, not taking her eyes off of it. Upon reaching the bookshelf, Disco's odd behavior caught her attention. "Hold on, let me look for the exit," Darlin consoled Disco. The bookshelf contained many books, but it did not take long for her to locate The Wizard of Oz this time. Darlin went to pull it, then paused. After what happened in the tower, she thought to herself, "I better grab Disco first." Bending down on one knee, Darlin called out, "Come here, girl. Come here, Disco." Disco just looked back and did not come. Underneath the black curtain, Darlin could see what looked to be a pair of metal shoes. She got up and walked over and picked up Disco. Out of curiosity, Darlin pulled back the black curtain and could not believe her eyes. Her grandmother was a freak, to say the least. Darlin, now with her jaw dropped, stood holding a barking Disco, taking in the marvel of the life-size replica of the statue of the Tin Man, complete with his axe. "Thanks, Tin Man, I almost forgot," said Darlin. Wait, am I missing something? As she made her way over to the table with the test tubes to collect her oil can that she had left. Oh, she was thanking him for reminding her about the oil can. Disco was inconsolable and Darlin tried to get her to stop barking at the statue. Making her way around the cauldron, taking one last look at the evidence that she found there. Once satisfied, she approached the bookshelf to pull the book. "It's okay, Disco. It's just a statue," said Darlin while looking at the Tin Man one more time. I know. He's kind of creepy. His eyes follow you," said Darlin. He's really watching us." Reaching out to pull she pulled the curtain closed. That would hopefully let her out of the room. She gently pulled on the book. Back, she lost her footing as the golden bricks beneath her heels gave way and she began to free fall into the floor. Jumping forward, Darlin turned around to see the 2-meter circle of bricks below the cauldron was descending into a spiral staircase. The sound of a brick rubbing on brick made Darlin cringe a bit as the bricks eroded the sand in between. The sound was comparable to that of fingernails on a chalkboard. Shivering sounds are shivering her spine. She watched the light of the room dim as the golden bricks began to dull. Once it sounded like the stairs were fully open, Darlin began to descend. The fire that was up burning underneath the cauldron had lowered and lit up the staircase below. Just as Darlin was at eye level with the floor, she took a last look at the statue, and the statue of the Tin Man still seemed to be following her. After taking a couple more steps, she remembered she left the other side of the curtain open. Turning around, Darlin ran up the stairs to close the curtains. Tripping on the top stairs, she dropped the oil can that she was holding and she closed the edge of the curtain to close. With one last look, "I bet you would like some of this," she muttered to the statue, shaking the oil can. The statue squeaked, startling Darlin. She slid the curtain past, and now the bright eyes She slid the curtain past the now bright eyes and ran down the stairs, not looking back once. Out of nowhere, the stairs gave way and Darlin dropped down on her butt, sliding down to another waterless slide. She wondered what was next in this adventure. The sound of bricks closing up from behind her echoed through the slide. A light below started to get brighter and brighter, and as she slid down, suddenly Darlin was in a somersault. She let Disco go in the oil and threw the oil can before sliding on her belly. With her mouth full of grass now, Darlin opened her eyes and could tell she she had finally done it. Disco was barking at the exterior of the wall of the castle that was closing up. Where exactly was she? She did not know. But it was a nice day, and she was alive. And out of that maze of insanity, it was good enough for her. After getting up, collecting her things, brushing herself off, there was a massive red and white striped tent in front of her. When she looked above it, she could see at the top of a Ferris wheel. Stuff was getting really weird. Not quite sure where she was or when she was or anything. She wondered if somehow she really was dreaming again. Perhaps she had been cast into another dimension. As she walked along the back of the tent, she was shocked to see her friend Willow and a couple of friends from back home standing at the edge of the striped tent. Darlin yelled out, "Willow!" and ran up and gave her a hug. "Oh my God, am I ever glad to see you. What the heck are you doing here?" Darlin asked with an ear-to-ear smile on her face. "Happy birthday, sexy. I love your outfit. You're a little dirty for a party, though, don't you think?" said Willow as she hugged the heck out of Darlin and began to pull the grass out of Darlin's hair. "Thanks, but why are you guys here?" asked Darlin. "We're here for the surprise party. Everyone's gathering in the back of the castle. You aren't supposed to be down here for another half hour," explained Kitty, another friend of hers from LA. She was beautiful, this Kitty. She had a couple years older than Darlin, but Darlin always admired her beauty. "Thank you for coming, guys. I had no idea," thanked Darlin. A loudspeaker announced before she could finish, "Everyone get ready, 25 minutes. There was a countdown. "You have to get out of here. You're going to ruin the surprise," suggested Widow, as she put out her cigarette. What's that in your hand?" inquired Kitty, pointing at the oil can. "Oh, nothing. You wouldn't even believe it if I told you." "Hey, can you take this? Can I borrow your shades? Give me your hat, Willow. I need a... Hey, let me use your purse. I could put Disco in it. I'll sneak around front and pretend that I didn't know." Yeah, great. That's a good idea." The girls agreed, gave her stuff, and they pointed the way Darlin should go. Darlin put on her disguise. She had a bright red sun hat on and big red daisy on in the front of it. The brim was very large and drooped down in a few places and hid her face very well. With the sunglasses, she looked like she looked like Kate Winslet getting ready to take a ride on the Titanic. Willow's purse actually went well with that hat. With Disco in pursuit, Darlin started to walk away, then stopped. "Wait, I do not know the way exactly. Will you walk with me?" asked Darlin. "You do not know the way? How did you get back here in the first place? Darlin, are you okay?" inquired her friend Willow. "I'm okay. I just came out of here a couple hours ago, and me and Disco were around the grounds, and she began to lie to her friend. She's like, 'Okay, we'll come. We'll show you.'" "You sure? What do you want to do with this?" asked Willow, holding up the oil can. Darlin looked at Kitty. "And Kitty, can you hide it for me?" "Sure, no probs. See you guys in a bit," waved Kitty, and she caught the oil can. I don't know if that makes any sense. Darlin followed Willow along the back side of the tent. When they emerged from between the back of the castle and the tent, Darlin could not believe her eyes. There was an entire midway set up. The zipper, which was one of Darlin's favorite rides when she was younger, From the angle she was at, Darling could see that they had the giant swings, which was our favorite now. How long have you guys known about this party? Darling asked, almost tripping over one of the large electrical cords that powered up the fairgrounds. Your mom sent out invites about 3 weeks ago, but we all agreed to keep it hush-hush. Who had Willow answered, who had started walking away from the midway. Darling smiled at the thought of her mother doing this for her and followed her friend. Hey, if anyone talks to us, you do the talking, added Darling, as she did not want to ruin anything. Hoping that she would have some sort of surprise left, she actually made her duvet? Dwab? I don't know what that is. It's a mumbled word. So the back of the castle was massive. There was hundreds of people, all dressed to the nines. Darling, she tried to not look, as she wanted to have somewhat of a surprise. She was pleased to see the turnout, though. There was many big-name people there as well. No doubt all her mother's doing. When she seen the massive stage with the huge... Okay, I'll continue.